Welcome back to Beyond the Hyphen, where we explore the crossroads of politics, diplomacy, and global affairs. In this episode, we're joined by Maryland State Delegate Natalie Ziegler, a first-time legislator, small business owner, and advocate for environmental sustainability and rural economic development. Ziegler has emerged as a pragmatic voice in Maryland, championing policies that promote clean energy, infrastructure investment, and access to affordable healthcare. Tune in as we access and discuss her path from the private sector to public service, how she works tirelessly to tackle climate change, and her vision for building a more resilient and equitable Maryland. Delegate Ziegler, it's so great to have you here with us.
Thank you. It is great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Before you ever thought about running for office, how did you first develop your sense or civic responsibility in your niche? Because it's really interesting how you first campaigned only 3 years ago in the later part of your career.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I ran for a seventh grade class president and I won. um, but I have actually always been interested in politics. I have to say, I had a very active family. I started protesting the Vietnam War when I was 12, and we lived in Massachusetts at the time. So it was really a hotbed of protests, and it was something that really impacted our lives because it was such a generational issue. Young people really hated that war. This is speaking very broad generalizations. And in the school that I went to, most people's parents supported it. And it was really a difficult issue between kids and their parents. And I actually moderated kind of a sit down and talk about it. Let's share our views and try and find a way to not hate each other around this because, the pictures that we were seeing were just horrifying.
Yeah.
Um, it was like a larger version of Gaza, and it was a very hard thing to deal with. I also, yeah, I guess long story short, I've been politically active all my life, and then I worked for CNN for a long time, so covering elections. I have also always enjoyed the horse race, in
Mm.
addition to the deeper and more serious aspects of politics. But I also find it fun, and it was very sad for me when our nation got so polarized and it got to the point where you really couldn't have political arguments because they're my sporting event. I have no interest in sports whatsoever. Terrible thing to admit, but I do love a good argument. So I was sad when that became almost impossible.
Yeah, I think the atmosphere in politics and policymaking makes us hesitant sometimes to discuss what really needs to be discussed.
Absolutely.
Now, what's really interesting, Delegate Ziegler, is your background as a small business owner and farmer, which that combination isn't all too common in any level of government. You come from that background. How have those real world experiences shaped your perspective in policymaking?
They've had a huge influence. There's no question about that. So, my grandmother owned the farm that I live on, and she died in 1989. And I was voluntold that she left a large family,
Hmm.
and I was delegated to manage it. And none of us really had any farming experience at all. I certainly didn't. I had a toddler, and I was very pregnant with my second child, and we lived in Washington, D.C., and I had a full-time job, and um, it was a very hard thing to get started with, but I got some good advice and some bad advice. Made a lot of mistakes, and uh, have learned a lot about it and really grew very interested in it. And I do think that bottom line, farming is a business like any other business, and an awful lot of the things that make farms work make any business work. So when my husband really wanted to start his own business, a separate one, because we never made enough money at the farm to live on, but but it helped. And so we started a jewelry manufacturing company, and that was really interesting and difficult and fun. And I guess the perspective I come from is I always felt particularly we manufactured overseas, I should say. And on all of my business trips, it always seemed to me that business people were trying to make things work and the government was trying to get in the way and make it hard. And, I was not in the government at the times, obviously, so it was my perspective, but I have not lost that perspective at all. And I really do think that as Democrats, we can be really too hasty to impose regulations without really thinking them through, to pass laws that are not well enough informed, that really don't come from the perspective of somebody who has been there and had to deal with it. So I'm a very pro-business Democrat, I guess I would say, and certainly, small businesses run the world. So
Mm.
I feel like they need support, and I'm never anxious to impose too many regulations. Obviously, some are needed.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's definitely important to inform your policymaking with the stories of your constituents, the stories of other people that you meet, but also your own, right? Especially as a small business owner and farmer, like you said, you've been there, you've experienced those actions and inactions too by the government. In a sense, that kind of gives you an extra avenue to go down, to really understand the struggles that your constituents face now that you're in a policymaking capacity. Environmental issues are a focal point of your platform, and I want to get to, you know, what does environmental advocacy look like in the daily lives of your Marylanders in your district? How do they lobby? How do they, um, you know, come together? How do they reach out to you?
Well, I guess I have an interesting district. It's a very purple district, and the agricultural community is very different in some ways from other parts of my district. So it's a balancing act. There are. I mean, I feel personally that farmers get blamed often for environmental problems that really that we get unfairly blamed for environmental problems, let me say. There really aren't very many of us. So we're an easy group to target because you're not losing too many votes. you know,
Yeah,
you can make farmers mad, but
yeah, that's true.
they just kind of have to deal with it. And I certainly try as hard as I can on my own farm to use best practices and be very conscious of the environment. But at the same time, it's hard for me to believe, as much as, I know there's runoff from farms and the rest, but that a farm is worse for the environment than a subdivision with 8,000 square foot houses and his and her Escalades in the driveway and the rest. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's super important how you bring up that, balance between economy and also environment. That balance has to be struck to, for lack of a better word, make everyone happy, right? Can you maybe share a piece of legislation or initiative that you worked on this past session pertaining to rural communities or the environment?
Yeah, well, probably the most controversial at the moment. that I can think of is the solar siting bill that the House passed. Um, I I wasn't uh, part of that bill specifically, but I worked on a solar siting task force for a couple of years, and it is something that I care a lot about. There is a lot of um, dissension about that bill. There's an effort to get enough signatures to put a ballot in, to put a referendum on the ballot to overturn it. And it is something that I voted for. I supported it. I think it's one of those places where, to me, we do need to think about the big picture. Yes, you have to save farmland, but the real risk to farming is climate change. The real risk to our planet is climate change. And I find it disturbing that people don't see that and don't understand that we have to get some renewable energy in Maryland. And
Mhm.
we really have almost none. And if you look at, I mean, I know there are people who think that renewable energy is not the way to go, that wind and solar are um, not a good solution. And a lot of the opposition to the bill comes from people who don't even really think that climate change is a serious problem.
Yeah.
But I am very convinced that climate change is a serious problem. And I think the vast majority of people are. So I think we got to do something about it. And we don't have time. That's, I would be delighted to see more nuclear energy, but that's a very slow thing.
Mhm.
And we can't just sit on our hands and do nothing. It's not fair to you.
So how do you make or what do you make of how the government, tends to approach these climate change issues and renewable energy currently right now, either, in Maryland, in another state, or at the national level?
I mean, I feel that my committee, the Environment and Transportation Committee, hmm, is really trying. We honestly, I think, as a whole, and there are Republicans and Democrats on the committee, really do care about the future of our planet and are doing everything we can in a million different ways, trying to get more money for transportation, trying to um, reduce plastic packaging. Just, there are a million different aspects, trying to keep the bay cleaned up, trying to keep our air clean and our water clean, and really working from a lot of different angles on trying to make things better. The energy piece is a very difficult one. And I do think that we passed some very good legislation this year. But it's going to take a little while. I know people are really upset about their energy bills. And
Mhm.
that's another thing that is always a balance that, with things like the energy performance standards for buildings, that you can't pass laws that require people to have more money than they have. You can't require people to do things they simply can't afford to do. And a lot of the times, the great thing to do is an expensive thing to do. So, the budget is always an issue. And this year, of course, more than ever, this year, things that came back with a big fiscal note just weren't going to happen. So that's something we have to contend with.
So is climate change and these environmental policies something that is contentious to the point, or in regards to a partisan divide, more than other issues, or a bit less, you see more work across the aisle?
I mean, in the end of the day, yes, it is a partisan issue. I mean, if you look at what's coming down from the federal government, yes, it is a partisan issue. I mean, that's literally a word you're not supposed to use. So, and yeah, I mean, that to me is really, really scary. Again, because we don't have time. We can't sit on our hands for another 20 years, you know? I mean, imagine if 10 years from now we had to look back and say, you know what, we didn't do anything. We just sat here and let it happen. And we had an opportunity to make a difference. And now here we are in a world where, we literally have climate refugees all over the place.
Kind of going back to when we talked about the economic demands, but also the economic and environmental realities of the consequences of our actions. As a legislator working, like you said, on the Environment and Transportation Committee in the Maryland General Assembly, how do you view the urgency of this environmental action? Like, how soon does it have to be done when you contextualize it with the economic struggle that's going on right now?
I mean, it has to be done now. It has to be done 10 years ago or 20 years ago. That's the terrible thing. I don't know if you saw that picture of the Swiss village getting inundated by a glacier, but those things, if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. And it takes time for processes to reverse if they even can be reversed. So yeah, I don't think that we have any time. I really don't. I think, as I say, this is stuff that needed to happen a while ago. And we do have to keep pushing. And at the same time, manage a transition. So, you have to be realistic about what you can and can't do. So, but it does have a lot to do with the federal government and the state government working hand in hand to offer the incentives necessary to make these changes. And so it's very disturbing to me that the federal government is heading in the absolute opposite direction.
Yep, absolutely. This polarization can also be attributed to the actions taken by the federal government right now. But let's stay focused on Maryland. We're a state that has shown the rest of the country, under the leadership of Governor Westmore, um, Senate President Ferguson, and House Speaker Adrian Jones, that we have our own list of priorities as a state. We are independent enough to take the risks of being exposed, of really going out there and showing everyone that you know we aren't afraid to continue to prioritize our state and our constituents. And I mean, it's just like a shifting matter. It's super volatile, not just in Maryland, but also outside of the state.
Mhm.
But something we can focus on, right, again, is our youth. Our younger generation is growing. We have constant input from so many different sides shaping our perspectives. But speaking of energy and urgency, there's so much momentum coming from our young people, especially around issues like climate action, climate change. And I'm curious what's something that you've learned from our young folks, maybe before, even as a policymaker right now, and how that's been translated into, how you view legislation, how you think about policymaking as a whole.
Well, the great thing about talking to young people is they are the ones who believe exactly what I just said, that this is stuff that needs to have been happening 10 years ago, and there is no time to wait. And it is really important because you're the ones facing a world that could be very unpleasant in many, many ways. And there's a sense of urgency about it that I find really refreshing because, you can start to doubt yourself when you talk to other people who don't share your views, who think that we're moving too fast, that this is too difficult, it's too hard on business, it's unfair to landlords. I mean, there's so many. We hear testimony from so many groups that are financially adversely impacted by some of the things that we want to do, and they're angry about it, and you can start to doubt yourself, as I say. So it's wonderful to talk to young people who are facing inheriting the world that we're creating at the moment, and have no doubts whatsoever about the necessity of cleaning the place up. We have really trashed our home, and we need to pick it back up.
Yeah, I think as someone from the younger generation, I obviously do think that there are so many perks to dedicating more attention and time toward the next generation and receiving their input during the process of formulating a society that the younger generation will ultimately inherit. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about the concept of localization. There's a lot of talk about localization, building local resilience. But for a lot, it feels like a buzzword. In your work, previous or current, what does meaningful localization look like, and why is it important?
Well, it's important because it informs the way people think. If people have action they can take themselves, it makes them part of a process that is bigger. So it informs the way they vote. It informs the way, I mean, it informs the way they vote. That's a huge part of this. But it also, I think there is an awful lot that can be done on a local level. I really do. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of people love volunteering. There's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into um, keeping places clean, doing community gardens, finding ways to reduce waste. I love the buy nothing movement. There's so many people that have those boxes on their porch, and that's a way not only of creating community in a world where that seems to be diminishing, um, and the fact that it's diminishing, I think is really very painful for people. So it not only brings people together, but it all and makes people feel empowered to at least do something.
Mhm.
But it also has an effect on elected officials. It really does. If you know that all of your voters are focused on reducing plastic waste, how can you not take that into account?
Yeah, how important would you say establishing a streamlined communication method with your community, whether it's town halls, meets and greets, just chats with your constituents face to face, having that basic human experience, how informative has it been for you?
Oh, very, very. And I think it's something that we don't do enough of, although Delegate Wu and I do a meet and greet every month and out of the session, and we do town halls as well. But I feel as though there is never really enough time for the audience to talk. And I wish there was a better in-person way to really communicate with constituents. But at the state level, there are a lot of people in a district. But it's really such an important thing. So we love when people contact our office. It's we do need to hear, and we also get our best ideas from constituents. That's how we know what what bills we need to bring. It really is important.
I love um, young people who have this initiative to take action. If, say, a young person, called your office in your district and wanted to start a local initiative, but needs the guidance or help from you, what advice would you give them on navigating the government while keeping their work still rooted in its integrity and in the environment and the community?
I mean, I suppose it depends on what it is. Like there are different things. We're trying to figure out what to do about trash on the roads. We had a constituent call, and we put him in touch with the State Highway Administration, and he has formed a group The State Highway Administration has talked about how much money they spend picking up trash and what the issues are, and their concerns about people walking along highways where this is another big issue of mine that I put a lot of energy into is road safety. People drive like maniacs nowadays. So you really, State Highway does not want people walking along, major state roads just because everyone speeds and it really is dangerous. But we're trying to come up with ideas for what we can do to they spend $18 million a year picking up trash. So crazy. What could that do for the Howard County Food Bank?
Yeah.
Or I mean, there's just a million better ways to spend that money. So that's something that if you have ideas about this, please share them because there are so many areas where we need to affect cultural change, where we just need to change people's thought process, including my own. I've had a lifetime of throwing things away, ripping open plastic packages, and would love to and do try to get some better habits. But throwing trash out your car, that's something I don't do, but I don't know how we get everybody to realize that that is really a social ill. It's not just a small thing. It adds up to being a really terrible big thing.
Would you say this emphasis that you stated that we need can somehow be implemented into our education system?
I think that would be a great place to start. I honestly do think that's a great place to start, but and probably a necessary place to start. I think road safety itself is the same thing that we need to start talking to people um, in elementary schools about, you know, what your responsibilities are as a driver and what the harm that you could potentially cause, which could ruin your life as well as somebody else's.
We can also draw like a parallel, right, between this ignorance that sometimes at no fault of our own, but just this system that doesn't emphasize these important things that you talk about enough. And if we look at Maryland itself, we do a pretty good job in terms of how well we establish our goal as a state. In the first week or so, Governor Moore said, we're going to do this and this. This is going to be our goal. Looking at the data, I know he is very focused on data driven approaches. And really, it's had Maryland gain more national traction. What opportunities or challenges do you see for the state going forward? And that can entail environmental issues or another aspect that you think is important.
I mean, the big challenge is the budget. That, yes. And I don't mean to put Maryland down. I'm just always about continuous improvement. But no, I mean, I think as a state overall, we are very, very fortunate in our leadership. There is no question about that. And we can be leaders. We do need to be leaders. But we are really at ground zero for these federal cuts. It really is incredibly challenging. And you probably don't remember 2008, but the knock-on effects of one person losing their job are really incredible when you think about it. That person isn't getting their nails done, isn't buying pizza on Friday night, isn't taking a vacation or renting a car, or on and on and on. So the effect on so many small businesses is incredible. And there were so many people, not just direct federal employees, but people who may have had a contract with the federal government. Maybe you sell paper clips and you sold 200,000 of them to the federal government and the rest to private companies. So really, the impact is enormous. and the impact on the state budget from reduced income taxes, from reduced sales taxes, is going to be very, very hard to cope with. And there are just a lot of things that we want to do, and I would feel in some cases have to do, um, that are going to be very expensive. There are a lot of, you know, Medicaid, for example. We are not going to be getting the federal funding that we used to be getting for Medicaid. So that is falling on the state. And the state, as a result, is having to push some responsibilities down onto counties. And it's not going to be easy. I mean, that really is our big challenge. It was a big challenge this year, and it will be a big challenge for the foreseeable future. I don't know when this is going to stop, but it's hard for me not to think that we're going to have a global recession. I don't see how you take that much trade out of the world economy and not see a global recession. I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, and I'm not an economist, but
Yeah,
it just seems to be logical.
yes, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people, groups, institutions, and local governments have been criticizing our federal government over in DC, particularly with a focus on the economy. Being a business owner, um, being involved in the private sector for so many years, what's your take or perspective on the role of the private sector and the government, and the potential of working together more, and even maybe as a solution to the budget cuts that we see?
Well, we've always known that we were too reliant on the federal government. We've known that for a long time. So, if there's a silver lining here, maybe this is the wake up call that gets us to focus more, and certainly Governor Moore is. There's no question about that. Focus more on making Maryland's reputation, um, as a business unfriendly state go away, and find ways to attract more businesses to Maryland. We need to grow this economy. We need to grow the private sector part of this economy, and we've known that for a long time. So, hopefully this will have the effect of lighting a fire under us all, and helping us to find ways to do that.
Yeah, I love how you keep going back to how the struggle is important in helping us realize that we have so much left to fix and that we can't, be complacent with ourselves.
Right.
As we wind down, Delegate Ziegler, you've experienced the government again in so many different yet crucial standpoints throughout your career. Right now, as that lawmaker in the state house making those laws, for those listening, whether they're future policymakers, farmers, small business owners, activists, or just people trying to make a difference in their communities, what's one thing that you would tell them about public service or owning a small business, um, that you wish you had known when you first stepped into these environments?
Oh gosh, that I wish I had known. Um, I guess in business, the two things I would say are don't have too much debt and don't have too many products. Were the two lessons I learned the hard way, which is a good way to learn things in many ways because it stays with you. As far as being a lawmaker is concerned, um, it's the need to be patient. You have to push and be persistent, but you also have to recognize that democracy, the difficult thing about democracy is you can't just wave a magic wand and make it happen the way you want to. And I understand the frustration of people who just can't bear how slow positive change can feel. It really, and I know I hear this particularly from young people all the time. And I'm sure it must seem as though no one is doing anything. And that's actually not true. It's just that in a democracy, you have to reach a compromise. You have to get people to agree to things. And that is incredibly difficult, which I'm sure just, if you've ever been at a club or, participated in any kind of a group activity, it's not as easy as it sounds. And when you have two different parties that have their own agendas, that adds another layer. So there's just layer and layer and layer of things that make it hard to reach a consensus. And that is what you have to do. So, yeah, you have to be patient. You have to be the kind of persistent that is willing to just put one foot in front of the other. And, you didn't get the bill passed this year, you bring it back next year and just keep on going.
Yeah. As we wrap up, Delegate Ziegler, I always love a fun but meaningful question to conclude our conversation. If you had a billboard somewhere in your district or somewhere in the state where every constituent could see it, what would it say?
Oh gosh. As far as uh, I, I can tell you what I would like it to convey. I'm not sure I can put it into words, but great question because I'm going to think about that. Because what if I had a billboard?
Yeah.
It's not impossible, right? Right?
Oh, yeah.
It would have to do with the effects that the polarization of our politics has had on our ability to solve problems.
Okay.
It has made us incapable of thinking broadly and creatively. It's made us incapable of sharing ideas with one another. And it has gotten in the way of moving forward in a big way. And I would love to, I can't do it in 30 seconds, but I would love to come up with something you could fit on a billboard that would express to people just how deeply dangerous and damaging this polarization is, because I really believe it is a cancer.
And fitting it on a billboard is or would be impressive in itself.
Yeah, it would. If you come up with something, will you share it with me?
Oh, absolutely. I'll let you know right away, Delegate Ziegler.
Great. Thank you.
Well, Delegate Ziegler, thank you so much again for joining us. It was a real pleasure hearing about your story and concerns, and we're just super grateful for your service to Maryland.
And vice versa. So thank you very much for what you do. I really appreciate it. It was very fun being on. Thanks a lot.
That was Delegate Ziegler with an honest and thoughtful perspective to this conversation. And I hope that you all learned something or felt inspired by her path from the farm to the state house. As always, this has been Mark Lee, and I'll catch you next time on Beyond the Hyphen.